Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, wanted to share with you an interview I got to do with Kenji Sudo, one of the content developers over at the Final Fantasy XIV team at Square Enix. Now, most people know him most recently as being one of the leads on the Ultimate Bahamut encounter. Obviously, he has a whole team behind him, but his name is the one that pops up the most, especially with, I believe there was a panel where his name was brought up quite frequently in recent Final Fantasy XIV time. I believe one of the fan fests. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Kenji Sudo for taking the time to do this interview. I even said in the notes right here that I'm sure Yoshida has him working on the next Ultimate encounter, so I appreciate him taking the time. He also even answered some bonus questions. I gave them backups in case there was anything he couldn't answer, and he answered all of what I gave him plus the 2 backups, so thank you again. That's a lot of extra effort right there to go through all that. I also want to thank the PR team for Square Enix for setting up this email interview, and of course the community team. You guys always do good work. You guys always make sure there's plenty of content for the community to have. But anyway, let's get into the questions. So for the most part, I'm just asking him about the developmental process of Ultimate, and if you just want to read that, check out the description of the video for the actual link to the document. So the first question I had is, Coil, Unending Coil, undoubtedly hardest content in the game. What was the development process like? I said it almost seemed like people just pitched ideas of mechanic combinations. You just threw those in there. So Kenji said that development process for this started with 2 ideas: a rough overall structure of the fight, and a focus on the type of game experience they were determined to bring to players. In terms of structure, first considered the flow of the battle. He knew he wanted Bahamut at the end. He knew he wanted to start with Twin Tanya. When you think of Bahamut, you also think of 7th Umbral Era and the Calamity, so use that to create a sense of drama in the structure. Because of that, Yoshida is actually the one who requested that Phoenix's resurrection be a part of the fight. So that was not originally a Sudo-san idea. That was a Yoshida original. Said, can you please, if we're going to do that, can you bring Phoenix into it? And as a fan of World of Warcraft, I'm sure he's seen that when that happens in certain other encounters in that game as well. In regards to the gameplay experience, the trio attacks, I actually don't feel like I was that far off. He said trio attacks, Grand Octet, fit that drama that they hoped to create, wanted players to experience fun, difficulty, and an overall cinematic element of the Ultimate tier through these combo attacks unleashed by their foes. He ended up asking members of the development team who played Binding Coil of Bahamut when it first came out during the 2.x series what the memorable mechanics were. Not necessarily the difficult mechanics, but the memorable mechanics. And they picked out the abilities that would be appropriate for the combo mechanics. Remembers the work that went into taking the feedback and information, trying to piece it together like a puzzle in his mind. It's kind of close to it. They didn't sit him in a room and say, so what can we do? But it kind of sounds like it works out that way. Guys, what are your favorite mechanics? Sure, we'll just throw all those into a thing. But he actually went through and said, okay, what would be the coolest ways to combine these mechanics? And I think he turned up with some pretty good ones. He was happy to hear during early planning stages that both the level designer and programmer who worked on the original Binding Coil of Bahamut, or the both of 2 people would be joining me in development of this new raid. I feel that because we were able to get some of the best staff members once again to build this new coil, they will design a more elaborate level of difficulty. So that's a good little dig into how they actually came about doing this, and that's kind of going to be what the theme for the rest of the questions is as well. So I had to ask him, Nail's RP mechanic, what was the idea? You know, just in case, I gave him what the community calls it, and then also I guess my actual explanation. And I just said, why this mechanic this way? And he said that it's a direct reference to the 1.0 version of the encounter, which I personally never got to do, even though I played 1.0 for some time. He says it was a similar mechanic. He would just unleash attacks depending on his dialogue. So they wanted this to them became the defining factor for Nail. Like, this is the thing that should define Nail in the fight. And I think players would agree this mechanic defines Nail's origin. However, the one concern they had is how it might be received, specifically worries that it would be received negatively. The mechanic was very hard to distinguish and would have never been suitable for normal difficulty boss battles. Yoshida and the battle team had concerns when he explained the idea to them, but he felt it was necessary, like it had to be there. It was just, that's Nail's character to act that way, quickly and without hesitation. And it would not be a true Nail fight if there were no memorable battle mechanics such as this. In the end, he took the chance and included it. I've criticized that mechanic, but I totally respect the idea from a developer standpoint. That, you know what, that does define Nail, and I can absolutely agree with that. And I think if we're talking about remembering boss battles, that's something no one who's done it will ever forget. And that's an experience to carry with you into the ages. Going on to question number 3, I had to ask the obvious, how did it feel when it got beat? And he said he was filled with like a few different thoughts. He was amazed that the group was able to clear it, happy the content he made was successfully balanced and clearable, successfully bested, and thankful to those who were challenging it. They said they took a lot of care, more than they paid more attention to detail. They took so much care than any other content they've released up until now. And it was very dramatic. He can imagine it was very dramatic for the world first team, what led up to their victory. But he also had like conflicting feelings. Of course, pleased. You know, he said the developer in him couldn't help but think, so it's finally been beaten. He said it wasn't so much a sense of defeat, but it was more like sadness that the journey was over. It was the fact that the world first race was over, and he had been developed from the early planning phases all the way through to implementation and balancing. And then with it being completed, it started, it ended, it was over. You know, it feels like the job became completed, but maybe he just wanted to bask in the tension of the world first race a little longer. He said it was kind of difficult to put into feelings, but I think we can all kind of understand from a creation standpoint, you know, how that must feel emotionally to put so much work into something and then it's beaten and it's over. You know, that's any developer would probably feel this way, but for something as grueling as Ultimate, I'm sure that if he may not be able to find words for it, but I think we could kind of understand it to some degree. Yoshida explained before, speaking about a comment he made in a live letter, that Titan was originally going to be the first Ultimate encounter, but Sudo-san insisted it had to be Bahamut. Other than player nostalgia, what were the reasons that Bahamut needed to be first? So Kenji Sudo heard about Ultimate and the concept from Yoshida, and there were two things he felt he had to make a reality. First was simply to ensure the fight was truly at the Ultimate level of difficulty. The other was to protect the feeling of the Ultimate class boss to those playing the content, building excitement for what awaits the challengers through the enemies, environment, battle flow, music, and overall gameplay experience. As the first chapter in the Ultimate series, I thought there was no way I could have anything other than a Binding Coil Bahamut-related encounter, so he pitched that idea to Yoshida, and obviously, that's what they went with. And I feel like that's pretty accurate. When you go through to Antania, to Nail, to Bahamut, to Golden Bahamut, there is that thing that he is describing right there. It does feel like the ultimate class, and it's something that Layla said when we had him on the interview for State of the Realm. So I totally understand that feeling. For the next one, players are concerned that Bahamut being first may have set the bar too high, and that doing an ultimate encounter on a single primal like Titan couldn't possibly feel as epic. It's a conversation I've had with a ton of people. Do you think it's still possible to produce an ultimate encounter with only a single boss? Now, obviously, I wasn't going to get to ask, what's the next ultimate encounter? So this is kind of like my way to try and probe into figuring out, like, what can we maybe expect? A lot of us have predictions. You know, the Warring Triad's a big one. All of the original primals and Ultimate Weapon. There's tons of ideas out there. As you mentioned, it is definitely going to be a challenge to follow the Unending Coil Bahamut with something like that. There are too many elements missing to have an encounter such as that fall in line with the concept of the ultimate tier. So having a single boss, it would be tough, basically. Specifically with Titan, there are far too elements that could be made more difficult, and if we force it, we would lose the uniqueness of the Titan encounters. Basically, there are things people remember about Titan, and he feels, ultimately, he says right here, that Titan Extreme is a complete encounter, and that digging any deeper than what's there is just forcing it. Like, you're just saying, well, we wanted to make Titan harder, so here's this other crazy stuff. If they decide to do Titan, he says someone else is probably going to have to do it, because they're going to have to find a way to create content and bring a new gameplay experience to players, because he's too attached to Titan Extreme. That's understandable. Titan, we've all, you know, I think even Yoshida made jokes like what an 8-way landslide would look like, you know, but at that point, just adding more landslides, like, does that even really qualify as ultimate? Or are you just adding numbers to things like Second Coil Savage did? So I totally understand that. But for me, that almost dispels the thoughts that Titan alone would be receiving that treatment in the next ultimate encounter. I know, again, a lot of ideas. Another one is all of Alexander being the next one. And then when Omega is finished doing all of Omega. But we can't just keep using the whole array tiers. There's other ideas floating around, and we got to start thinking about what could possibly be another encounter that can match Coil in terms of scale, and in terms of flow, and in terms of the ultimate feel of battle. Next question is, with the success of Ultimate, players are desiring content similar to it for other parts of the game, such as dungeons, like an Ultimate dungeon. You think or hope that Yoshida would ever let you unleash one of your original dungeon creations before the balancing team does their work. Now, we've heard multiple stories about the Yoshida where there's been dungeons where it's like, really? You did this? We can't have that. I think one in particular was St. Mosion's Arboretum. The final boss was like insanely difficult compared to what we have now. And motorcycle, thanks. I don't think Yoshida would allow it, but he also says at the same time he doesn't think he'd ever like ask Yoshida if he could do it. If they're going to be putting out content, refining it so it appropriately matches the target audience and skill level is necessary. Truthfully speaking, the content is always impossible to clear before the balance team helps put in adjustments. We see it as an opportunity where us developers get to create wacky situations and laugh about it. And he had a very positive and cheery emotion regarding that. Not exactly what I was kind of thinking. I guess I maybe shouldn't have asked before the balance team does its work, because obviously the balance team is there to do the work. But I think that even just the concept of an ultimate dungeon, I think he kind of, from what I see here, it almost feels like he sees dungeons as targeted for an audience of a specific type. You know, it's supposed to be the thing that you can hop in, hop out, and be done. So I guess my question probably, I shouldn't have thrown that part at the end, but that's what we got out of Sudo-san, so thank you. This one's a bit more personal. A lot of people have been talking about Sudo-san lately, so I had to ask how that felt. You know, Yoshida's become sort of a rock star within Final Fantasy XIV and the MMO communities due to his work as producer and director. I also would like to extend to him that players are starting to respect his work in a similar fashion. His name is popping up in a lot of appreciation threads, or, you know, it has been over the past couple of months. How does it feel as a developer to see players reacting in such a way to the content he creates? So he said something that he always keeps in mind when creating content is to create something players will remember. So seeing reactions like that does make him happy, but he doesn't want to take all the credit for it. It's impossible for just one person to make this happen, and this was only possible thanks to the other teams within the development staff. Graphics team put up with my crazy request to create excitement through the amazing visual presentation and overall flow of battle. The programming team constructed the complex battle mechanics. The sound team accommodated last-minute adjustments right up to the deadline. It was a collaborative effort between all of us. This being relayed to all of our players is what makes him happy more than anything. He wants you to know, remember, he might be the name you know, but he is not the one man who did it all. He wants you to appreciate every individual team who worked on every individual aspect of that encounter, and I suppose, I'd imagine if we asked him, any encounter that the game offers. So that's his message to you. Make sure to thank everyone, not just him. I asked him, does he have anything to say to the players, to those players who are making those appreciation threads? And he said, it's been 4 years since the rebirth. This sounds a lot like Yoshida writing this in a sense. It has been 4 years since the rebirth of 14, but he's helped create lots of battle content with Nakagawa, who we also know as Mr. Ozma. Towards the end of 3.x, they added some new members to the team, and now 4.0, 4.1 have been released. There's, I'm sure, more unique content that expresses our individuality will continue to be added, so I'd love for people to keep an eye out for those and give us feedback. We continue to bring excitement to our new teammates and you, the players. Yeah, Los Angeles, what are you going to do? Thank you very much. So those are all the questions I had initially asked, and then I provided some backup questions that were a little bit more filler. These were just like, well, if he doesn't take one of those, what do I really want to ask? That isn't, what's the next ultimate battle? How does it feel when you see the work the Bounce team does? Do you ever feel certain content is toned down in difficulty too much? Oh my god. Anyway, I'm going to leave it in. Kenji Sudo said, way more often than not, I feel like I could have had more adjustments made before handing it off to the balancing team. There are also times when I hear points made by the bounce adjustment team, but I noticed the same thing before they mentioned it, so it feels like he should have fixed it before it got to them. That's how much the bounce adjustment team thinks about how the gameplay feels and the overall bounce, and they base their input on that thinking. I felt this especially with the Unending Coil Bahamut. Had it not been for the balance adjustment team, the DPS settings during Golden Bahamut phase would not have been possible. I never felt the content was toned down in difficulty too much. That's adjustment. That's adjustment anyway. As come up with the content. Oh, okay. That being said, as I work with the balance adjustment team, there's no point in ruining the gameplay experience that he's imagined to be included. So he will debate with the balance adjustment team to protect the elements of the encounters at all costs. So if he has an original envisionment and they said, no, this isn't going to work, he will make sure that thing stays in there. Even if it has to be adjusted, it's staying. All right. And the very last question here is, what is it particularly that you like about designing super difficult content? Now, this was under the presumption that because of some of the other encounters, such as Titan Extreme, that we've received from him, that he, you know, we almost envision him as the guy who wants to make the hardest possible content. And I asked him, do you prefer developing it over easier content? And he just said, in terms of super difficult content, if at all possible, I don't really want to make that kind of content. From the planning stages, he has to fray his nerves to be careful. After implementation, he has to confirm a bunch of things, like will the mechanic function as intended? Does it match with the picture? During adjustments, I would struggle with the intervals and numbers of the mechanics. After release, will people solve the mechanics as intended, etc. All these things are going through through his mind. And there'll be just a long period of time where his heart will not be at rest. This struggle is very hard to bear. It's much more fun to create moderate difficulty content that's not too high, but not too low on the difficulty level, like the normal versions of raids or extreme primals. So those are all the questions I got to ask Sudo-san. Thank you again, Kenji Sudo, Sudo-san, whichever you guys wanna hear, you guys wanna prefer. I got used to calling him Sudo-san because that's what I call him when we're setting these things up, and then I call him Kenji Sudo half the time because I don't know. I flip-flop back and forth. But thank you so much, Sudo-san, for answering these questions, for taking your time. Thank you for the work you did on Ultimate as well. Again, thank you to the PR team for helping set up this interview. And again, thank you to the community team for, again, helping set this up as well. But on that note, let me know what you thought. I'm hopefully going to be bringing some more interviews after the New Year's. Want to, wait for the holiday season to be over before doing anything further. So thank you for watching this. The next live letter, don't forget, December 15th. So I will have a video on that when that comes out. So wait a little bit, but we'll be getting it soon enough. Thank you for watching. I will see all of you in the next video. Gotta go grab something to eat before the Game Awards tonight. Game Awards. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.